good evening, and welcome to another 8 p.m. live stream. So just as you folks begin to enter the stream, can I just say that we've got a really interesting guest lined up who is going to be his first time on the stream, hopefully not his last. But above and beyond that, I want to welcome Chris. Chris, well done. Been first guy on the stream tonight. Well done, top marks. Yeah, we're going to talk about that. So we've got a kind of an hour on cancel culture. That's what we're going to talk about, because it's such a big issue. And we've talked loads about other topics. We've talked about COVID. We've talked about the EU till we're blue in the face. Talked about the States. I want to talk about cancel culture, not least because I've been cancelled, as you all know, and but I'm not the only one. So that's going to be the agenda. So as we get into this one here, do remember, if you're watching it on Facebook, like it, share it on YouTube, share, subscribe, hit the subscribe button. I'm sure you can beat the YouTube algorithms. All the social media links for all my different channels are down below. Make sure you're following me on those, particularly Minds. Make sure you're following on Minds, by the way. I like Minds. And then give it the thumbs up if you like what we're saying. Thumbs down if you don't. But I mean, if you don't like what we're saying, you shouldn't even be here. So I mean, thumbs up. As many thumbs up as possible. And finally, but not least, if you like all of this, try and support us by going to altnewsmedia.net/donate and drop £1 in the hat. Now, you need to do this because that is what keeps the wheels on the road. So even if it's £1 or so, all of you folks on this, you're getting great entertainment. I'm not charging you like the BBC. So this is the best bargain you're ever getting. So see if you can do that. Right. That's enough preamble. I'm now going to introduce a special guest for this Thursday night. Somebody says, quit begging. I'm not begging. I'm telling you. I'm not instructing you. I'm not begging. My special guest for tonight, anyway, if we can bring on Jon Holbrook. So here's Jon. Jon, you're very welcome to the stream.
Hi, nice to be here, David.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you on the stream, Jon. We've got a lively bunch as usual here, so my advice is to ignore them all, and I'll tell you what the right things to respond to are going to be. But anyway, Jon, as I say, on a serious note now, we're going to talk about cancel culture, and a lot of some of us have been through the storm of cancel culture. But you've been through it in a very particular way. And I think really people will be really interested in hearing exactly what you've experienced, why you experienced it, all the things around it. So if we just bring up, first of all, just before we get into that, Jon, can we just bring up the first slide? Yeah, Jon, barrister, rights and legal issues. I mean, I've followed Jon for a long time, and back in the Twitter years, as I look upon them, frequent contributor he writes on a load of issues, actually. Really good writer, some really good stuff, which is one of the reasons I followed you, Jon. Jon is a lawyer who argues for less law and more politics. Probably disagree with that, Jon. I think we need less law and less politics. But anyway, put that to one side. Let's move that to one side, and let's just then set this one up. Here's a couple of headlines, Jon, which I guess some people may have seen in the past few weeks. Cue the first one. The next one, please. Yeah, barrister. This is from the Huffington Post, the biggest rag on this planet, by the way. It's not a newspaper, it's a hate piece. Barrister sacked for branding mixed-race teenager Robbie after equalities case. My goodness. Next one. Next slide. Barrister in racism row, previously fired by council over anti-migrant rhetoric. Oh my goodness, Jon Holbrook. And then finally, let's go to the next one. Of course, because there's always two sides to every story, but you have to look hard to find it in some cases. And this is a really good article over on Spiked in defense of Jon. And I mean, the punchline of this is the legal profession has become intolerant of unorthodox views or just views in general. So move that to one side. Jon, tell us your story, because I think we're all ears.
Okay, well, good evening, David, and hello, everybody else. So it's been quite a momentous couple of weeks for me. This time last week, I was a full-time practicing barrister in a barrister's chambers. And then on Sunday, I was expelled. To my knowledge, my chambers, which has been going for about 125 years, has never expelled anyone before. And I'm not aware of other barristers who have been expelled, certainly not expelled in these circumstances.
Yeah.
And perhaps one point I ought to make clear is that barristers, certainly my type of barrister, we're self-employed. So I wasn't employed by my chambers. I was in a chambers of 55 barristers, and we all clubbed together. This is what barristers do. They all club together, and they pool their resources and share the overheads of running a building and clerks and other staff. But the point is, as a barrister, you're self-employed and you're independent, and you take work in your own name. You do it in your own name. So I've always known that what I was tweeting was controversial. Popular with a lot of people, but hated by many others. So I've always known that what I was doing put me in some jeopardy. And the way I hoped I could defend my position for as long as possible was by having two different accounts. One, a professional account where I tweeted, not very often, but occasionally, cases I'd been involved in that might have been of interest to my professional clients. And then the account that I used most of the time was a private account. It made no mention at all of my chambers. It did say I was a barrister, but so what? I am a barrister, and I think it's relevant that people know that in the comments that I make. And just on that, by the way, as a barrister, I'm regulated by the Bar Standards Board, the BSB, and they have never contacted me. They've never had a problem with the sorts of things I've been tweeting, and I think that's because they recognise the importance of free speech and my right as a citizen who happens to be in a barrister's chambers hasn't caused them any difficulties. So that's background, if you like, David. But let's just get on then to the particular tweet that got me into this spot of bother.
Hot water, yeah.
So it was one Sunday morning. I saw this tweet by the Equalities and Human Rights Commission, the EHRC, and they regularly tweet the sort of things that really rile me because they're always celebrating individual rights and equality law, which is not the nice, fluffy, law that everyone likes to think is so wonderful. And they tweeted about a girl called Ruby Williams who had won a legal case a couple of years ago for which she got £8,500 compensation. And the issue on which she succeeded was that she defied the school uniform policy, which said that her afro hair, she was actually of mixed race, but she had afro hair. Her afro hair had to be of reasonable size and length. And she defied that policy by having her hair sort of not of reasonable size or length. And because she defied it, she was sent home quite regularly by her school. And it seemed to me the school was quite entitled to do that. She was breaking the rules. So she sued.
Yeah. So sorry, just stop you on that point. So she was regularly being sent home because she was breaking what the school regulations were regarding the hairstyle.
Yeah, right. Definitely. Yeah. It was that simple, really. And ordinarily it seems to me that schools should be entitled to have their own school uniform policies and to enforce them. And that's really all that was happening here. But she brought a race discrimination claim under the Equality Act, and that succeeded. And as I say, she won £8,500 of damages. And the EHRC put out this tweet, which had a little video. She didn't feature in the video, by the way, but her parents did. And the EHRC tweet was basically saying, oh, isn't this wonderful? Isn't the Equality Act so important? And isn't this a shocking case of race discrimination? So I responded, basically saying no. The actual words I used were to say the Equality Act undermines school discipline by empowering the stroppy teenager of colour.
Yeah, those were the words. So what's the problem with those words, John? Exactly.
Well, You know, David, to this day, I still don't know. So about 5 days later, my head of chambers was contacted by the mother of this girl, who by the way, is now 19. It's not as if I'm
Yeah,
picking on a
yeah.
young girl. Um, the mother of this 19-year-old complained to my head of chambers. And when he said to me, I've had a complaint about this tweet, and he read it out to me, I said, well, what on earth is the issue there? And I thought he was complaining about my use of the words of colour.
Yeah,
I'm not sure if he was, but I did point out to him that the words of colour are actually quite politically correct these
they
days.
are.
It's not as if I
Yeah,
called her coloured.
yeah.
So there could definitely be no objection to my use of the words of colour. And I have to say, David, to this day, I really don't know what the problem is with that tweet. Save that, of course, we live in a society where the political climate tends to mean that you have to celebrate all forms of racial and cultural difference, and you can't criticize them. And
Well,
I think that is what caused the Twitterati to get themselves worked up into a lather and essentially say I was a disgrace to my profession, and hence put a huge amount of pressure on my chambers, which ultimately resulted in my expulsion.
so whenever you tweeted that out, John, that comment, so did that then trigger the Rogarati on Twitter? Because the Twitter mob, so to speak. And did they come for you on Twitter? And then did they come for you in terms of your employment position and so on and so forth?
Yeah, I mean, I think, as you know, these things can quickly snowball. So far as I know, it was only ever complaints on Twitter. Um, it all seemed to take off on the Friday. Even though I posted this tweet on the previous Sunday, so it took about 5 days before people seemed to work themselves up into a lather about it.
Yeah.
And there's a few big hitters on Twitter, particularly legal commentators, who are all very woke. And of course, it only needs a few of them to start tweeting that I'm a disgrace to the profession.
Yeah.
And then a lot of people, who unthinking people who just love to join a mob, all joined in, and
Yeah.
I'm afraid it did put huge pressure on my chambers. So I was asked to take the tweet down by my head of chambers, and by the way, I don't have any problem with him asking me to do that, because the chambers was coming under so much pressure.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I refused. These requests have been made to me before, and I've always refused, because I'm not going to let anyone decide what I can and cannot say. Now, obviously, occasionally it happens that someone points something out to me on a tweet, and on rereading it, I think, yeah, perhaps I can see
Yeah.
that's not a good idea, or I can see why it's being misinterpreted. So occasionally I do take tweets down, but I looked at this time and time again, and I couldn't see anything wrong with it. So I definitely was not going to let anyone say I had to. Well, they can say I could take it down, but I wasn't going to take it down. Not least because I think you probably know that once people know that they can cause you to take a tweet down, you might buy yourself a little bit of breathing space, but they'll come after you again in a few days or a few weeks' time.
Yeah. 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 Well, actually, John, just on this, someone's brought up this point, so let me give you the chance to address this. Someone on the stream, John Coffey, says, "Stroppy teenager of color is unacceptable. Why did you have to reference color? Also,
Yeah,
Afro
no,
is not something any school should discriminate against." John, what's the answer?
well, on the first part, I mean, actually, a lot of people have said, why did I raise her race? The answer to that is because her race was
Yeah.
central to
Yeah.
the EHRC tweet. And it was also central to her ability to bring this claim. Had it not been that she could rely upon the race discrimination aspect of the Equality Act, she would never have had a case. So it wasn't really me that raised her race. In fact, the EHRC tweet itself had specifically said, this shows why race discrimination must be outlawed. So I didn't raise the question of race. She did, and it was central to her succeeding. Now, John raises the other point of why discriminate against a girl because of her hair. I think the short answer to that is that school uniform policies should apply across the board. Now, I appreciate that this particular aspect of the policy made a specific reference to afro hair, but the notion of any girl or boy's hair being of reasonable size and length, it seems to me is entirely appropriate and should apply across the board. And if a school decides to have a policy like that, I don't think on the whole, there may be some specific exceptions, but on the whole, I don't think schools should be making specific exceptions for particular girls or indeed in other examples, boys.
Well, I'd read, John, some of the stuff you'd written about this, and I mean, it's a very reasonable point that you make, that a school is linked into its local community. So schools, it just makes common sense for schools to have policies that, you know, are good for the local community and reflect the local community. So this was the school policy, wasn't it? I mean, this was not Jon Holbrook saying this. This was the school saying this. And all you were essentially doing was standing up for what the school was saying.
Yeah,
is that right?
Definitely. And I mean, the issue of where the community interest and how that can best be served by the teachers, the head teacher and the governor, I think is very important, because I mean, I knew at the time I sent my tweet that there had been a number of legal cases involving school uniforms. And to take one of the more significant ones that was decided a few years ago, it involved a boy in Brent. And he said for cultural reasons, he had never cut his hair and he had it in cornrows. And that was contrary to the school policy.
Yeah.
And the reason why the school had that policy was, well, a number of reasons. It didn't want to accommodate too much to cultural differences, because it knew that once it did it for one boy, it would be inundated with requests from many other boys and quite possibly girls who would all come forward with their own particular cultural differences and hence ask for exceptions. And also, and the head teacher specifically made this point in his evidence, he said, in our school, we are in an area where we have a problem with gangs. And gangs like to distinguish themselves and identify themselves with different symbols. And he said, that's why we are very much against any sort of symbol, because we do not want any sort of gang culture being brought into our schools. And therefore, they had this across the board policy, so that it applied to all, black and white, all different cultures. Everyone knew what the policy was, and everyone ought to have been able to comply with it. Except that, as I say, this one boy then eventually challenged it because he'd never cut his hair and he wanted to wear it in cornrows. And unfortunately, the judge decided in his favour. And since then, it's been very difficult indeed for schools to have reasonable school uniform policies.
And John, just to answer the questions I've put up here, whereabouts was the school located that we're talking about? Which part of the country?
So the school with the girl, that was in London.
Girl,
yeah. And the school with the boy that I was just talking about was in Brent, North London, Northwest London.
Yeah. Okay, I hope that answers that for you, Nick. Yeah. So yeah. So I think I've seen people say, "Oh yeah, but Jon Holbrook, I mean, he knew what he was doing, because it was racist, because it was Afro hairstyle in particular was being singled out. No other hairstyle was being singled out by the school." Is that a fair comment?
Well, the interesting thing is, why did they even have a specific policy that dealt with Afro hair? And I suspect that was because it was a policy that was decided after this other case I've just been talking about, which essentially said that you have got to go some distance towards accommodating cultural difference. I don't actually know what the other policies were in this particular school, but I would strongly suspect that every child had to keep their hair of a reasonable length, and if they had buns, then the buns had to be of reasonable size. So I don't think for one moment that this was a policy that said children with Afro hair had to comply with this requirement, whereas any other child could have whatever hairstyle they liked. I don't believe for 1 minute that would have been the policy. Yeah.
So if you had a someone of a different ethnicity with a similar kind of disproportionately bushy hairstyle, it would have applied to them as well, wouldn't it? But the point is,
absolutely.
but the point is that this was taken and turned into a race issue, wasn't it? By the family concerned, and then by the decision in their favor. So like ultimately, these things become quite kryptonite then, because you dared to challenge back against the orthodoxy. I mean, that's where it went wrong, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, we've been talking about hairstyles, and obviously, in one sense, hairstyles they're not the most important thing in the world,
Yeah.
but I think it's a question of the principle and
Yeah.
the right of a school to be able to have a rule which is applied across the board. Now, there's been another case more recently where a school in Newham banned the hijab, the sort of head covering and scarf, and they banned it for girls under the age of 8. And they wanted to extend that eventually to a ban on girls under the age of 11. Now, the head teacher was very keen to introduce this policy once she talked to a number of her children, and she got very worried about the extent to which they didn't identify as British. She asked them what nationality they thought they were, and a lot of them said they identified as either Indian or Pakistani, but they didn't identify as British. So she and her governors, and this was a multiracial school, but quite obviously it wasn't as if children were being particularly targeted, other than for any reason that she wanted to help them to identify as British. So they introduced this policy, but unfortunately there was such a backlash on social media in particular that after a few weeks, I think it was, the policy had to be reversed, and also that the chairman of governors had to resign. And I think that's what happens when the law gets involved and takes sides on these contentious and important political issues, because essentially it means that head teachers and governors can't make these decisions, even though they are the people who are in the best position to know what's required.
Yeah.
And it means that the campaigners who are promoting some form of diversity, multiculturalism, call it what you like, they know that the law is on their side. And that's why they feel emboldened to push and push and push, and to often do it in some pretty offensive and vile ways as well.
Well, then obviously, John, the next part of the story is so the Twitter mob came for you, and then they went after, well, they complained then about you. So to your chambers. So what happened then? What was the next step in the saga?
Well, I think so. The complaint was made late on a Friday, and that was the first I knew about it. By the way, I mean, I think there had been a lot of activity on my Twitter account on that day, but I hadn't noticed it. Not on this issue, by the way. But then, so I refused to take the tweet down, and then on the Saturday, my chambers put up a notice disassociating itself from my tweet, which was really completely unnecessary, because this was a private Twitter account. There was no basis for anyone to fairly or properly think that I had done this in my chambers capacity. I patently hadn't. But as soon as that disclaimer was put up on the Saturday, it was pretty obvious to me that my future in that chambers was going to be over.
Yeah.
Because the Twitter mob, being what they are, as soon as they smell blood, it just fortifies them to carry on pushing and pushing. Yeah. So I pretty much knew on that Saturday that my career in those chambers was over, which is why actually I did resign, because whilst I was more than happy to take the flak for this, I didn't want the other 50 or so members of my chambers to suffer as a consequence.
Yeah.
And by the Sunday and Saturday, and certainly by the Monday, it became clear that a number of professional organisations that would instruct the barristers quite regularly were saying, unless you do something about Jon Holbrook, we're not going to send any more work into your chambers. So I couldn't inflict my own, I'm quite happy to have punishment inflicted on myself for things I say, because I think they're important. but I didn't want to inflict it on anyone else, so I actually resigned.
Right. So, that's quite a, that's quite a dramatic thing for anyone to have to do. How did you feel about that in the moment?
Well, I think you can tell from the expression on my face at the moment that actually I'm feeling pretty happy about everything, which might seem a bit odd. But I think the truth of the matter is that I've always been interested in politics, and I've probably always wanted to be more involved in politics, and I've had the time to devote to it. So, I've been at the bar, full-time barrister for 30 years. That is pretty exhausting. And so I actually now feel quite relieved to have not only been expelled from my chambers, but to have also decided that I'm not going to put the wig and gown on again, because I've had enough, and I'd actually quite like to pursue the things which I think are important. And that will undoubtedly mean you drawing on my legal experience to do things such as challenge the Equality Act, and more importantly, other bits of legislation like the Human Rights Act, and the general discourse of individual rights, which I think is so pernicious.
There's definitely, John, a sense of liberation. People think when the modern day mob, witch mob comes for you, it's awful. In the immediate period, it's not very nice, and I speak from personal experience as well. But afterwards, I fully relate to you that there is a sense of liberation and thinking, right, well, I believe today what I believed yesterday. The only difference is now I've got a greater opportunity to say it. So we talked about this, folks, before we came on air. Those who know me know that the things that I say today are no different to what I said last September on Twitter. The difference is I'm not on Twitter to say them, but the truths and opinions still stay the same. They don't particularly change. But so there's a couple of people have said, I just see comments here on the stream, John. People are saying, oh, John, here's a comment here. Chris is saying, Toby Young, Free Speech Union, they'll sort you out. And this is a great example of essentially, in a way, your career was cancelled, John, in a way, by the anti-free speech mob on Twitter. And that's why we've got things like the Free Speech Union, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I was delighted when the Free Speech Union was formed. What was it, about a year ago now? Because there are so many people. I mean, I'm only the latest, really, but there'll be another one tomorrow and next week.
Yeah.
And actually, it's happening all the time. I mean, it happens all the time, and we never hear about it. Plenty of ordinary people lose their jobs, and it never makes the news headlines. So that's why it's terrific that the Free Speech Union is there to help these people. And certainly with me, that it was very nice to have an organisation that I could talk to, and to receive support. I don't think they've said anything publicly about what's happened, and I think that's unfortunate. I don't know why that is, because it does seem to me that they do sometimes speak up quite publicly about people who have got a bit of a public profile who this happens to. But I don't know. Maybe there's a particular reason for that I'm not aware of.
I think, John, one of the things that strikes me about all of this is that this pernicious cancel culture is spreading so fast, and people seem to think if they keep their heads down low and they don't speak up, then they'll be okay. And that to me is so foolish, because ultimately, and everyone knows this, they'll come for everybody ultimately who dares dissent from the common view, from the prevailing orthodoxy. Let's put it like that. So if you oppose the wokery, they'll come for you. End of story. So keeping your head down and being mute, staying, it won't save you. John, a lot of positive comments here. People saying, you showed respect. Someone says you should be in politics, Jon Holbrook. You need to be in politics. We need more people with integrity. Well, we do need people with integrity, and not bending the knee. But it is also awful, John, that you're being branded, racist tweets and all this kind of stuff, and this is where the mob lose it. I mean, but at one level, but they win at another level. They just have to say you're racist, and that's it. Game over.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Actually, just before I answer that, David, one other detail about the story that I ought to make clear, just so that everyone has the full picture,
Yeah, of
is
course.
that whilst I resigned, that wasn't acceptable to the membership as a whole. And I think that's quite interesting, because it was what then happened is that there were some members who unfortunately essentially wanted their pound of flesh, and they thought it would be too dignified to allow me to resign.
Yeah.
So that's why, even though I'd handed in my resignation, and I was more than happy that the notice period was waived, so that effectively I ceased to be a member within a matter of days,
Yeah.
that wasn't acceptable, because some of the members, it seems a majority of them, wanted their pound of flesh, which I thought was very disappointing. And so I was ultimately expelled. The irony about that is that I actually voted for my own expulsion. That might seem a little bit odd, but there were financial reasons for that, because I didn't want to have to serve out my notice period of 9 months, which actually just shows how pointless the whole thing was. Save only that they wanted to, well, I don't think they wanted to, but they had, by expelling me, effectively turned me into something of a free speech martyr. That was their choice.
And John, this was members of your own chamber you're talking about.
Yeah, so we're talking about 50 odd barristers.
Yeah. So some of your own colleagues wanted to make sure they got their own sort of, yeah, God almighty. Yeah. Yeah. It's shocking, isn't it? I mean, it just shows in a way, maybe we shouldn't be in the least surprised. So, okay, so the legal profession is as woke as any other one.
Yeah.
Maybe more woke than some, I guess. I mean, I'm not sure if the plumbing profession or the electricians of this world are woke, because they've actually, got kind of just got to get on with the rest of their lives. But maybe some people who live in little ivory towers can afford to be woke.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, one of the points I made when I resigned was I said to all the members, I said, look, what this shows is that if you want to practice as a barrister, then you either have to be a Guardian reading liberal, or if you're not, you have to stay quiet about it. Because if you challenge wokery in the way that I have, you're not going to have a long career at the
No.
bar. My own experience tells everyone that. And the truth of the matter is, if it wasn't that I was prepared for this to happen, I wouldn't have tweeted in the way that I have. I wouldn't have said the things I believe in.
Yeah.
And that's really quite shocking, isn't it? If people don't feel as if they can speak their mind, what is happening to our democracy? And just coming back to your point, David, about how even if you keep your head down, people will come for you eventually. I think the truth of the matter is that a lot of people just can't afford to be cancelled. They can't afford to be sacked or
Yeah.
to lose their jobs, or indeed to deal with what is often seen as some public shame, because other people will say you're racist or homophobic or
Yeah.
something else terrible.
Yeah.
I don't mind if people say those things about me, because I know it's not true, and I'm really not that concerned about what the woke camp think about me. I'm far more concerned about what the challengers of wokery think of me. That's the audience that I'm speaking to.
Mm.
But the truth of the matter is, if cancel culture is real, it
Oh,
does
yeah.
exist. Yeah,
Yeah.
and no one can ignore it, and that must have. Well, we know it has a really detrimental effect on democracy, because people cannot engage in an honest discussion on the basis of what they really think.
Just a couple of questions. Someone's asked, did you get any support in quiet from other colleagues, John? Were you offered some support, or were you became an instant pariah?
No, I had I mean, I wasn't. It all happened so quickly. I wasn't, and of course, not many people are in chambers at the moment because of the lockdown.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so it was a bit difficult to know, but I certainly had messages of support both within my chambers and outside of chambers. And since this has all happened, and it became very public, I've had a lot of messages of support from my clients,
Mm.
many of whom are simply gobsmacked that this could have happened.
Yeah, because you mean, John, an interesting point that this raises is you said that the people do have a fear of when these epithets are hurled at them, racist,
Yeah.
bigot, whatever it is, and I guess it's different for, maybe let's generically say, people of a particular age spectrum, maybe our age spectrum. It's one thing. That's why I always said what I wanted to say, and
Yeah.
I guess I had a degree of wherewithal to be able to know that. Well, if they come for me, I'm still okay. But if you're a young person, like 20-year-old or something like that, they're in the young part of your life, your career's just starting in whichever sphere that is. You're going to be petrified to speak against the orthodoxy, aren't you? I mean, you can't speak against the wokery because those young folk know that, as you just said, John, that's going to be it for them. Then they're not going to ever go anywhere in their career. They'll never build anything to be able to fall back on anything, and that's terrifying. So basically, the entire younger generation are being, petrified into silence.
Absolutely, David. And there's an interesting point here, it seems to me, which is to say we have 650 MPs.
Mm.
They are supposed to be representatives of the people. I don't think a single MP has spoken out about what has happened to me. I know that David Lammy, the Shadow Justice Secretary,
Yeah, yeah,
is saying I was a disgrace to the
oh,
profession
yeah.
and basically calling for my head. If he can do it, and do it to his 600,000 followers, knowing full well what the impact of that tweet would be, why are there apparently no MPs who are prepared to speak out for the other side of the argument? I mean, even if people don't agree with my views, which is an underlying view, which is an essential challenge to multiculturalism, which I
Yeah.
think has gone far too far,
Yes.
why is no one even prepared to speak out on the basis of free speech? On the basis they may not agree with what I said, but they will defend my right to say it.
Well,
Why has there not been, so far as I know, a single one of our 650 MPs who has said that?
well, you're quite right. Well, I mean, absolutely, and I well remember, John, I was followed on Twitter by many MPs, especially
Yeah.
Conservative MPs who did follow me. They know who they are, and they did contact me privately. Before all of the malarkey of last September, when it all happened, silence, the silence of the little lambs. But it does speak. I mean, it does speak volumes. And is it because, John, I put it to you, my learned friend, that it's because they're petrified as well. They don't want to be, the Daily Mirror or whatever, or the BBC more likely, saying, oh, such and such supports racist barrister. They're scared. There's a bunch of sheep in Westminster, is it? I mean, I think they're as scared as the 20-year-olds. They're all scared of the wokery. They're petrified of it. And that's the perilous state that we've come into. David Lammy, a complete buffoon. A guy who's, I mean, funny enough, John, I don't know how it came up, but I saw a thing today of David Lammy's infamous time, 2 minutes or 3 minutes in the chair in Mastermind. I don't know if you ever saw that. Did you ever see that clip?
I don't think I have, no.
Oh, you should watch. Google David Lammy Mastermind.
Okay.
It's remarkable. Who came after Henry VIII? Henry VII.
I have seen that.
Yeah. A guy whose IQ, clearly is an issue. Nonetheless, he damned me, by the way, as well. So we share so much in common in this one, John. And yeah, but where were the more sensible voices of defence for your right to speak freely, as you say it?
No, I agree. And it's interesting, David, that of course this story has been in pretty much every mainstream newspaper, as far as I can tell.
Yeah,
And of course, some of those newspapers allow comments. The
yeah.
Guardian doesn't, which is interesting. But the Daily Mail do, and the Times do. And I had a look at the comments that were being posted underneath the articles that had been written about me.
Mm-hmm.
And the Daily Mail article, by the way, was not particularly sympathetic at all. Whereas the Times one I thought was quite balanced. But the interesting thing was, even in the Daily Mail one, where the article had been slanted against me, probably about 90%, I would say, of the comments were in favour of me and my stance. Either saying what on earth is wrong with what he said, or many of them going further and saying, well, look, he's actually got a point on the issue of diversity and multiculturalism. And some people say, oh, well, that's the Daily Mail. We all know about Daily Mail readers. Well, to which my point is, well, they are citizens. They do count.
Yeah.
But then you look at the Times, which is pretty much an establishment newspaper. You look at all the comments in the Times article, they were significantly in my favour as well. So when you say, David, that we have a political class that are terrified of challenging the woke, I think you should ask, why is that? Because I actually think the majority of people in this country, and even if it's not the majority, certainly a very significant number, are sick and fed up of all this wokery and the cancel culture that goes with it. They are crying out for some individuals and an organisation that will stand up for them and articulate what they think, but feel intimidated so much that they can't say.
Yeah. Well, maybe John, that's because there's an incredibly important schism, I think. And what you've got is you've got on social media, Twitter in particular, you've got there's a significant number of lefty wokeists who do constitute the mob. But then once you go off social media and you go into the comments on the Times or the Mail, or you encounter different people. I mean, I well remember leading up to the 2019 general election, if you'd have believed everything you saw on social media, Jeremy Corbyn was going to walk into Downing Street.
Yeah.
Didn't happen. Just like in 2016, if you believed everything you saw in the media, British people were going to vote to remain. There is an incredibly significant difference. And maybe it is, John, because the people that were writing and commenting along the lines of what you've indicated in those newspapers, maybe that is just the ordinary people. But the ordinary people maybe aren't spending 24/7 on Twitter waiting to be outraged.
Well, I think that's very true. I mean, I think it's often said that Twitter is for the time rich. I mean, if you're if you're doing manual work or whatever, or a demanding 9-to-5 job, you don't have the time to sort of switch off and go on Twitter. So there is that element of it. And also, I think it's quite dominated by the middle class who like to think they've got opinions that everyone else should listen to. So, I mean, Twitter is undoubtedly dominated by that sort of person. But then, of course, as you and I have both discovered, David, Twitter is not slow in silencing certain opinions.
No.
And so I experienced this recently, because when there was this tsunami of complaints that I was subjected to about 3 weeks ago, obviously, Uncle Tom Cobley and all went through my 15,000 tweets, and it looks like they found one that Twitter objected to.
Yeah.
And it was a ridiculous objection. It really was. But everyone knows that Twitter will silence some challenges to wokery. And when people know that, it of course does have an impact on what they feel able to say. I mean, if all I talked about was children and cats, then Twitter would never come after me. But because I am interested in the political world and I want to challenge it, I feel compelled to say things which I know will certainly attract the attention of the Twitterati and all their woke nonsense, but also the actual censors in Twitter as well may well come after me.
Yeah, well, you're absolutely right. I mean, and that is the problem with social media. I guess, John, that's one of the reasons that, for example, in my own case, I've chosen to develop this kind of medium on the basis that rather than just knocking out, 260 character comment, which people can sometimes, misunderstand or misread, you can actually have an informed conversation, and you can extrapolate on points and you can expand on points, and people can say what they want. I mean, nobody's censored on the stream whatsoever, but that's not the nature of, I think, Twitter, which then leads me to ask, is social media healthy for political debate?
Well, that's an interesting question, isn't it? I mean, is it healthy? I mean, the first thing I would say about that is that, so I have a journalist friend who says, why on earth do people go on social media? It's just asking, why are they on Twitter? It's just asking for trouble. It's asking for the sort of trouble that you and I have had. But I think the point about that is, and I often used to find this when I would come home after a tiring day at work. I don't have the time or the energy to write an article.
Yeah.
And yet I want to say something.
Yeah.
So, I'm on my Twitter feed and I see something and I just respond immediately because I think I have something interesting to say and I'd like my followers to see it and engage with it. So that's why I do it. And, it's a very important part of the public debate that we should all be encouraged to join. So I think, I would in some ways encourage people to take part in social media, but then it's problematic because it's so skewed. And it's skewed for those two reasons. One, because of the nature of the people who tend to dominate it. And secondly, because of the attitude of the platforms that run it, which, as we know, are very much signed up to the woke agenda.
Well, yeah, and I think that's why, for example, we've seen a proliferation of new platforms, and particularly Parler, which has obviously been taken down, and Gab, which I'm on and which hasn't been taken down. And I guess one of the differences with those platforms is, you're not the product, as it were. They've just simply created a town square where you can talk your mind, which is what Twitter used to be like, John. I mean, I'm not so old. I can remember back in 2012, 13, 14, you could say whatever you want. And it was reasonable then. I think the Twitter in particular, Facebook and others perhaps, altered in 2016 after the Brexit vote and the US presidential result. I think there was a recognition, gosh, Donald Trump used Twitter to get himself in the White House. That must never happen again. So I think there's issues like that. But I do think, I agree with you, and I guess I followed a very similar route to yourself. Sitting down to write sort of lengthy articles is demanding. You can make your point sometimes. I mean, my only skill was, I think, that I've ever had on social media is to be able to contrive 140 or 200, 280 characters in a pithy way, which hopefully people makes a point, and that's great actually in as far as it goes. But where it's not great is where you have to censor yourself if you're going to say what you think. That's not great, is it?
No, it's not, and that's where it becomes unhealthy because then I think if lots of people are censoring themselves, and I'm sure this is what happens, either by not contributing at all or by not saying what they really want to say, then the whole political discourse is skewed.
Yeah.
And I think that the woke are actually suffering from this as much as those like us who want to challenge the woke, because the woke actually think they are very popular. The truth of the matter is that they are not very popular.
Not, no.
And I actually think, David, that's why they rely upon cancel culture, because normally it is the woke who are seeking to drive people out of jobs and to shame people into silence. Why are they doing that? Well, I think it's fundamentally because they know they do not have the arguments that they can use to win people to their point of view. And that's why, and I know you've experienced this, David, nearly all of my critics on Twitter would say I was racist. That was the one word that came up time and time again. And they think if they can use that one word label, then that's enough to win a debate. It's not. It's nonsense. And to my mind, it simply shows how the notion of racism has been completely gutted of any proper meaning. I mean, look, I was born and brought up in a city. I went to school in the 60s and the 70s. I know what racism is because I've seen some of my schoolmates practiced it very much, particularly in the 70s. But we're talking about this is 2020, 21, isn't it?
It is, it's a long time.
Many years on, the world has changed a lot. And I genuinely do not think that racism is a social force. It is certainly true that you can find isolated individuals who are racist, but the vast majority of people are actually quite revolted by the notion of racism, in the sense that they actually see all different races as equal, and they want to see themselves as part of the same community. So racism has now come to mean something that it never used to mean and didn't ought to mean. And what it now tends to mean, and this is why people have tried to attach the label to me, it means if you challenge the notion of multiculturalism,
yeah, yeah,
because you actually think that to have a harmonious community, you need to have a lot of common values.
yeah,
And for example, I am troubled by that example I gave earlier about the school kids who don't see themselves as British.
yeah,
I'm equally troubled about many migrants, some of whom have been here second or even third generation, who don't speak English. I am troubled by all of these developments in society. There are some parallel communities which are developing. Now, my concern about that is not racist. On the contrary, it is about overcoming racial difference.
yeah,
But but it's very difficult to have that conversation these days without people trying to close you off by damning you as racist.
yeah. And another important, yeah, you're absolutely right, John. And you know, but they've caused so much damage with the way they've bastardized the word racist and twisted it out of all recognition. But other things like diversity, that word's been taken and twisted out of all recognition as well. I mean, you're allowed to have all opinions of thought so long as it agrees with them. That's not diversity. I mean,
No.
real diversity would be accepting your opinions, my opinions, other people's on the stream's opinions, and saying, hey, look, you're entitled to your opinion. I don't agree with you. That's fine, but you can have your view. But the diversity agenda, John, and again, this is part of cancel culture. Diversity is about removing diversity, actually, of thought.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right, David. I mean, a better word for diversity is conformism. Because as you point out, when people talk about diversity, they tend to talk about diversity of identities, particularly cultural and racial diversities, which is why issues like hair become disproportionately important. But in reality, you see, and schools in particular, just coming back to the school debate, schools ought to be taking individuals away from themselves as an individual and helping them to see that they are not the center of the universe, which of course is what all teenagers think. But that's part of growing up, isn't it? You realize you're not the center of the universe.
No.
And, becoming an adult means that you are able to see yourself as part of a community. And moreover, you respect the authority of teachers and the school. It's all part of the growing up process. But on this issue of identity, it seems to me one of the problems with identity is that it gets people to get quite self-obsessed, about their own particular difference, about their own ethnic concerns, how they are different from others. Now, up to a point, I entirely understand that. But at the end of the day, we have to accept that we are one nation and we are one society.
Yeah.
And we all have to have a common and agreed framework of ideas within which we resolve these differences.
Yes, and that's the essence of a civilized society and a successful society. You see, if we can do that, we can resolve issues then. But if you're not allowed to think and say certain things, then what outlet do you have, John? You're being denied a fundamentally important outlet to express your concerns, and that doesn't lead to a good place. So those of us, like you said, like I think everyone here who want to have a peaceful, law-abiding society, we are right to be concerned about the fact that the opportunity to express our views is being clamped down. And actually, since last month, since January, since the change in the White House, I would put it to you, John, we're going to see even more draconianism by the big tech censorship, which will further enforce the woke culture agenda. So we need as many warriors like yourself to fight against it, because I think if you thought it was bad in leading up to 2020, get ready to rumble, because 2021 and beyond, I think it's going to be very difficult.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, it was great that Brexit has happened. I was initially a little bit cautious about Trump's victory, but towards the end of his presidency, I thought he'd done an exceedingly good job, and I was very disappointed that he didn't win, in inverted commas. Don't get me going on that
Oh
issue.
yeah,
But,
this is YouTube and Facebook. Cough, cough, honk, honk. It was a completely legitimate election result. Remember that?
Yeah, but I think so. I think the difficulty is that I think that the woke, if you like, feel fortified by what has happened in America. But I actually think as well. I mean, sometimes I'm quite optimistic. Other times I'm less optimistic. But on the whole, I am optimistic because I think what has happened, and you mentioned the issue of Parler being shut down. I just think it's become so clear that we have big tech oligarchs who do not respect the rights of ordinary people to participate in debates. They are constantly skewing how that debate goes. And as you pointed out earlier, David, after Trump won in 2016, they basically promised themselves that they would not let Trump win on social media again. And so their censorship of him, particularly in the aftermath of the election, was, I thought, absolutely shocking. But I think as a consequence of that, in America, of course, where there are more people with bigger and deeper pockets, I think that people now realize that we have to develop our own alternative medias. And I think, something Parler or something like Parler or Gab in a much better and bigger form will undoubtedly develop. What this has taught me, David, is that you cannot. I mean, I've been slowly disengaging from the mainstream media because I don't think it tells the truth.
No, it doesn't.
No, and I am also disengaging from mainstream society, if you like. And that's partly, of course, because they have disengaged me. I mean, basically, if they are saying, Jon Holbrook, we don't want you because of the views you hold, then fine. I'll leave mainstream society because I know that there are millions of people who do feel like you and I do. And the important thing is to be able to give those people a voice.
John, you're absolutely right. I mean, this was a realization I came to. The BBC finally got rid of me around about 2015 or so, and again, just because I was consistent in my views, and I don't believe there was anything particularly bad about them. But I learned that lesson as well, that you can't straddle the two horses. You know, and certainly not in 2021. The legacy media, which to my view is toxic. It's a threat to our well-being. And here's the thing: you talk about the fact by you, John, saying the stuff you say, there's millions of people out there who will relate to that and agree with that. And you're dead right. And if you look at the viewing figures for, say, BBC Question Time, that's dwindled till a trickle of people watch that now once a week. Tonight, they'll be lucky to get 700,000 people watching that. A year and a bit ago, John, they were getting 7 million. So the legacy media doesn't represent the many people. To be honest, you and I do much more so. But you can't say that, because if they let us on, then that spoils the facade, and therefore, you're better staying away from it, I think.
Yeah, no, I agree. And there's, I'm not the only one whose views on this have changed quite a lot in the last few years. I mean, I can remember it was only about 3 years ago that I was prepared to defend the BBC on the grounds that it was important to have a national media. Yeah. But, having seen, first of all, how they dealt with Brexit, and then their coverage of somebody like Trump, and just generally their agenda, I mean, on the lockdown and so on and so forth. I mean, they decide what the mainstream opinion is, and then they just funnel that and push it all the time. And if you want to question it or challenge it, you don't have a voice. Your voice is not heard on the BBC or indeed the mainstream media as a whole. So that's what forces us, I think, a lot of us, to realize that we have to set up our own alternative forms of media where we can have an honest discussion with ourselves.
Yeah, that's right. And I think there's going to be continued new platforms coming along. The lefties always said, oh, well, if you don't like Twitter, get off it. Well, fine. Then they say, oh, well, build your own internet. Well, fine. Some people are doing. There's lots of initiatives in these areas. There's lots of channels that will allow John, yourself, and me, and others to speak freely and reasonably, but in a way that confounds the narrative, you know. So we know, as I'm streaming tonight, there are certain topics we can't discuss, and there's certain words I can't even say, and you wouldn't say, because that would be problematical on the channels we're streaming to. The day will come, and it's not very far away, John, when we will be able to say exactly what we want, when we want. And that's the way, you know, well, one of the good things about capitalism, the entrepreneurial spirit, is how we develop things, you know. I mean, some people will remember, you might even remember years ago, I remember MySpace being talked about as MySpace, it's the future of social media. I remember people talking about Friends Reunited, it's the future. They've all gone. They're all in the dustbin of digital history. And with a bit of luck, I believe these big sort of tyrannical tech companies, they're going to end up in that dustbin as well. So it's good that people like us, John, I think, strike out. And I have to say, you know, hats off for you for not allowing yourself to be, you know, bullied and having to bow down to the masses. It's not easy. All I lost was a social media platform. I mean, you lost your position in Chambers. So I think, folks, you know, John, I think you've underplayed in a degree, John, the position you were in, and certainly your courage in adversity. When the mob come for you, it's never a nice moment, you know. But that moment passes, and then as you said, the elation comes in the sense that, yeah, stuff them. I also think, by the way, they project, John. I think they project all their inadequacies onto other people. Do you not think so?
Well, I certainly think they project their inability to argue.
Yeah, well, yeah.
I mean, that's what's quite fundamental to me, because I think, you know, we all have different points of view, you know, whether it's on the left or on the right. Everyone's entitled to hold in their own different points of view. How do we resolve those differences? The only way you can do it in a civilized way is by having out the argument. And that's what I think those of us who, for want of a better expression, are on the right, if you like, or at least certainly those of us who want to challenge wokery, I think we on the whole appreciate that, which is why I don't think on the whole people like ourselves believe in cancel culture. I mean, the tendency is always, when you see that the woke are using cancel culture, the tendency is to try and use it back at them. And I know occasionally that does happen because the temptation is there. But I actually think it's wrong. I think we must always respond to cancel culture by saying it is always wrong.
It's always wrong,
Always wrong. The only response to hearing something you either disagree with or do not like is to have out the argument and to say why you disagree and try and convince people to your point of view. That's the essence of democracy.
Yeah, I mean, in all my years on Twitter, I never called for anybody who opposed me to be banned. I always took a view, well, look, you have your opinion, I have my opinion. We can, in my world, you can agree, disagree. You can agree to disagree, and that's the end of it, you know. And that's how it should be. But I'll tell you, just as a thing, as a point, you see trying to get people, John, the more woke people, to come on channels like this, where the odds aren't going to be stacked deliberately in their favor. For example, they could be taking on me. They could be discussing things with you. It would be done fairly and balanced. They are mighty reluctant to do that, I have to say. They'll trot into the BBC studio or Sky studio or Channel 4 studio. They'll do that, no problem, because they know that the odds are in their favor. And I think that speaks more to, as you say, their inability to actually articulate than anything else. You know, because if God forbid David Lammy come on to argue the point with you now, I'd be very happy for the two of you to go to it. I wouldn't be piling in one way or the other. That's how it should be, you know. But John, I have to say, we've had some lovely, nice, really good feedback. I think someone I know here says, John, a true British honourable patriot. There you are. Big respect to Jon Holbrook. Good for you, John. So yeah, I hope to see more of Jon Holbrook. So John, I think you're you know, it's in a way it is a very it's sad, really, in a way. The crap you've had to be put through. It's wrong, but unfortunately, we live in such a world. But nonetheless, here it is. Thanks very much, Jon, for coming on and telling your story. You can see the streams really like you, so I hope you'll come back, Jon, because we tackle all kinds of topics.
I'd love to, David.
And as I said, we followed each other for a long time on Twitter until my Twitter death. So I can tell you there is life after Twitter death. So even if that should, God forbid, happen to you, I assure you there is life beyond that. But listen, Jon, thanks for being on the stream. Thanks everybody for being here. Hang on, Rebecca Butler says you didn't post my comment. Hi, Rebecca. I didn't see your comment, so I can't always post comments. So sorry about that, but there we go. Anyway, the stream has ended, so that's it for tonight. Jon, pleasure to see you. Take care of yourself, and obviously, keep us in the loop with any further developments and so on and so forth. But I think you've got the support of the stream. Indeed, as far away, Jon, just to let you see the width of my reach, Hawaii, one of my Hawaiian regulars who's on the stream. So yeah, all around the world, Jon, they've been listening to you tonight. Thanks very much for being here, Jon. Thank you, everybody, and I will return very soon. But that's it for me for tonight, everyone. Cheers, everyone, and good night.
Good night.